The stew had been simmering for over 4 hours, filling the kitchen with the warmth of clove rosemary and browned shallots. I stirred it, gently mindful of the ceramic spoon Harlan once gifted me on our 30th anniversary. The oven buzzed. The sweet potato gratin was nearly done. I was setting the table when Avira appeared, gliding in with that affected air of ownership she'd adopted since moving in. "It's too spicy," she said, not even tasting it. Her eyes flicked to the place settings. "And these chairs, they're too low for my hips. You should think about replacing them. And the lighting, it's so dim in here." I didn't respond. I simply adjusted the napkin at her place setting and turned to check the gratin. Silence for me had always been sharper than reply. Later, as we sat down to eat, Rosen arrived from her upstairs studio phone in one hand, slippers tapping on the wood. She gave the room a cursory glance, then sighed. "Mom says this meal is too rich for her digestion, and she's been waiting all afternoon for help with laundry. You knew that, right?" I looked at Malin. He was buttering his roll eyes down. As always. That night, the knock came as I folded away the dish towels. Rosen stood in the hallway, face lit faintly by the sconce. Her voice gentle, rehearsed. "I think it's time we draw some boundaries, Isoria. My mother needs care. Meals, laundry, small things. Either you help her as part of this household, or you consider leaving. Your energy just isn't aligned with this space anymore." Behind her, I saw Malin pause at the stair landing. He looked at me, said nothing, walked away. I nodded once. In my bedroom, I opened the closet slowly, letting the scent of lavender sachets calm my breath. I pulled out the small navy suitcase Harlan and I once used on weekend trips to the Finger Lakes. One by one, I folded my sweaters, smoothing the edges, each crease a quiet decision. By morning, the house would belong to their noise. But tonight, it was still mine. The driveway was still dark as I reversed out my headlights, catching the edges of frost along the hydrangeas. Harlan and I had planted our second spring here. The house stood behind me like a painting I wasn't allowed to touch any more familiar, but suddenly off limits. I didn't cry. I'd done that years ago, quietly, in other kinds of loss. I took the scenic road north, the one with the bend that overlooked the old textile mill. The same route we'd take when Malin was small, strapped into the back seat, with a stuffed rabbit named Clive. That little boy once had croup so bad I stayed awake for 3 nights straight, with his head on my chest and steam from the shower fogging the walls. I was supposed to fly to Chicago that week for a conservation fellowship. I stayed instead. Every corner of that house carried something I had made with my own hands. I stitched the dining room curtains from a bolt of Belgian linen Harlan had brought back from a trip. Each quilt held secrets in the stitching, one for Malin's graduation, another for his wedding. The gravel path in the garden, I helped dig it stone by stone. The car heater hummed low as I reached the edge of town. I pulled into a modest lakeside lodge. There was no check-in fuss, just a key and a glance from the tired clerk. "Name?" he asked. "Isoria Cinderell," I said without pause. The name from my girlhood, the one I hadn't signed in decades, settled easily on my tongue. Inside the small room, I placed my suitcase on the bed. The quilt was synthetic. The lamp buzzed slightly, but the silence was mine. No footsteps overhead. No biting comments in the hallway. I took out the old leather folder from the bottom of my case and opened it. Inside, trust documents, property filings, the original deed. The signature line remained blank. I'd never given the house away, and they never thought to ask. Dean Trasker's office smelled the same as it had 20 years ago. Leather, old paper, and pipe tobacco. He never quite quit. He looked older now, with looser skin around his jaw and reading glasses that kept slipping down his nose, but his mind was still sharp as a bramble. He didn't ask me why I was there. Just poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and waited. I believe I said as I set down my leather folder that it's time we exercised the clause. Dean opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and nodded slowly. So they finally said it out loud. They did. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. When Harlan and I set up the trust, after his heart scare, we included something Dean had cleverly suggested, a dignity clause. If I was ever made to feel functionally unwelcome in the home, the title would revert to me completely. Not to be shared. Not to be disputed. You're within every right, Dean said. They don't know, do they? I shook my head. They assume ownership comes with presence, but presence doesn't mean permission. He chuckled. That's poetic. He drafted the formal notice then, and there printed it on firm linen paper and sealed it with the small brass stamp he always used for Harlan's documents. They'll receive this by Thursday, he said. They'll likely ignore it. Until the next envelope comes. And the next. I sipped the lukewarm coffee, then placed my hand flat on the table. Let them redecorate. Let her mother rearrange my pantry and hang new curtains. I want them to feel ownership before they learn what borrowed ground feels like. Dean looked at me over his glasses. You're not angry? No, I said quietly. Anger's loud. I prefer quiet certainty. He folded the envelope and tapped it twice on the edge of his desk. By the time they read that letter, they would already be 2 steps behind. The first photo arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A message from my neighbor Jolene slid into my inbox with no greeting, just an image of the garden. My garden, with every last lilac bush uprooted and a half-dug fire pit in its place. The caption read, "Did you approve this?" I didn't respond. The next came the following morning, a crew of workers hauling out the living room's original fireplace tiles. The ones Harlan and I had found in a salvage yard in Vermont, hand-painted and chipped just enough to show they'd survived another home before ours. Ripped out like debris. Jolene told me later that Avira had started hosting what she called grounding gatherings in the backyard strangers, with drums and sun hats, chanting around a makeshift altar made from my old potting bench. When asked where I'd gone, Rosen smiled breezily and told neighbors I was visiting a friend near the lakes, probably won't be back. She even laughed, like I'd slipped quietly into some distant retirement. A character written off. One photo showed Avira stretched out in the sunroom recliner with her feet on the cedar trunk Harlan built. A tea tray sat beside her, and she was mid-sentence lips parted in a smug expression. According to Jolene, she had just said, "Now this feels like our home." In the lodge room, I zoomed in on her shoes, mud caked on the soles pressed against the very cushion I'd stitched by hand. Then came the copy of the refinancing form. Malin's signature at the bottom. Avira had helped with the paperwork, Jolene said. No one had read the fine print. It was always like that with Malin, he skimmed, trusted, assumed. I saved all the images, filed them neatly by date in a locked folder. Let them build. Let them rip, rearrange, and repaint. Every nail they drove deeper was one more thing they'd have to tear out themselves. By Friday morning, Dean had filed the final paperwork. The title now sat cleanly under my name. No ambiguities, no co-owners, no shared rights. The trust had done its work and the house was mine once again, not symbolically, legally. I made a quiet call to the utility company. The woman on the line was polite, even cheerful. "Yes, Ms. Halwyn. We can transfer full control of electric, gas, and water services back to the named owner. You're listed as the sole holder." I thanked her. She didn't ask why the heat needed to be shut off that night. The following morning, Jolene texted, "Garage won't open. Rosen is yelling at Malin." Avira wrapped in a blanket. Did something happen? Malin must have made the call himself. According to the notes Dean forwarded me, the electric company had simply told him, "Sorry, sir. The account holder has revoked all secondary access. We can't override it." At the lodge, I sat by the window ledger, open. I had maintained every household record since 1984, electric bills, minor plumbing receipts, the $500 gift I once gave Malin to help with his first car. It was all here. One tab led to the joint emergency fund Harlan and I had created. Rosen's name had been added during their engagement temporarily, she'd said, just to get the paperwork going. She'd never known she was only a co-signer, not a beneficiary. With 2 clicks, I froze the account. Not a dollar could be withdrawn. Later that evening, I received an email from Dean. Avira had filed a formal complaint claiming elder harassment and unjust eviction. But she hadn't counted on something simple. She wasn't listed anywhere. No lease, no visitor registration, no visa documentation. Just a woman squatting in a house she never had the right to occupy. Dean's message ended with one line, "ICE has been notified." I closed my laptop, stood up, and drew the curtains. Their warmth had been borrowed, their comfort conditional. By Monday, the wind had picked up outside and within the walls of my former home. Jolene texted that morning, "Big envelope taped to your front door. Red seal." Rosen tore it off like it was poison. Dean had sent it express. The top line printed in bold notice of unlawful occupancy. Below it my name, Isoria Cinterell. Halewin stood in clear legal font. Malin called Dean just past noon. I know because Dean forwarded me the call transcript. My son's voice panicked and uncertain. "She's kicking us out of our home." Dean replied evenly. "Mr. Halewin, your mother owns the property outright. Your continued residence was contingent on her welcome. As of now, that welcome has been formally rescinded." I imagined Malin standing in the hallway, where I once kept our family portraits, trying to make sense of a house he thought would always be his, just because he was born into it. Rosen reacted as I expected. She launched a live stream that afternoon from the sunroom, her voice syrupy and aggrieved. "This is elder abuse," she said to the camera. "I've devoted my life to healing others, and now I'm being cast aside by a bitter woman who can't evolve." But then the comments started rolling in. "If it's your wellness home, why isn't the deed in your name? Why would she revoke access if you weren't being cruel? You sound entitled, not enlightened." Within minutes, the live stream ended. Later that night, I sat across from Lyda in the Lodge Cafe. She'd driven up from Boston without my asking. Her hand was firm on mine. "You're not just reclaiming a house," she said gently. "You're reclaiming your name." I nodded. They forgot whose name built that threshold. She didn't respond with platitudes. She only reached into her bag and handed me the updated deed, neatly folded and notarized. The storm hadn't passed. But now I held the pen. The knock on the lodge door was soft, uncertain. I knew it was him before I even stood. Malin had always knocked like someone asking for permission rather than expecting it. Lita looked up from her tea but didn't speak. She knew this was not her moment. I opened the door and stepped aside. He entered slowly, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the room, like he was searching for something to hold on to. "I saw the deed," he said. "Dean gave me a copy." I nodded and gestured toward the extra chair. He sat stiffly, like the cushions might accuse him. "You didn't have to do this, Mom," he said. Finally, almost a whisper. "You could have talked to me." I looked at him carefully. "You were in the room, Malin, when your wife told me to serve her mother or leave. And you said nothing." He closed his eyes, the weight of it landing in his shoulders. I didn't know what to say. Everything was happening so fast. I poured him a cup of tea, not as a gesture of forgiveness, just civility. He took it with shaking hands. "You don't have to choose sides," I said, voice steady. "I'm not asking for that, but you do need to choose truth. You know what happened? You were there." He nodded but said nothing more. Just sat there staring at the steam curling from his cup, like it might spell out the answers he never found the words for. Later that evening, Lita showed me something on her phone. Rosen's retreat website had been bombarded, comments pouring in with one-star reviews, people calling her a fraud, asking about the true owner of the property she called her sanctuary. Apparently, someone had uploaded the live stream, the full one. The moment Rosen said, "Either serve my mother or leave," it was circulating fast. Malin left without saying goodbye. I didn't stop him. He needed to feel the silence for once, not as an escape, but as a mirror. By Wednesday morning, the clock started ticking. Avira had filed another complaint, this time through a different agency, claiming elder neglect, intentional property manipulation, and emotional targeting. But she hadn't expected the paperwork to circle back to her. Somewhere in that bureaucratic web, someone noticed the irregularity. A call came from a federal number, then a letter. Then, within 48 hours, a quiet knock on the front door. Malin told me later that she didn't even pack, just stood there stunned as two agents asked her calmly to retrieve her identification and step outside. She said nothing to Rosen. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence and a closed door behind her. Meanwhile, Rosen turned to what she thought was her weapon, public sympathy. She went live again, claiming she was being persecuted by a jealous matriarch, clinging to outdated power. She asked her followers for donations to mount a legal response, calling it a war against injustice. But it backfired. A former intern someone Rosen had dismissed months ago posted a full clip of her at a private healer's circle, laughing about how easy it was to push her mother-in-law out. She just packed her little suitcase and left like a good girl, Rosen had said, drink in hand. The video spread fast. Comments flooded in. People who had once supported her were now asking who really owned the house, who really held the power, and who had been erased. That night, Malin came home to find Rosen pacing in the kitchen, face blotched with frustration. "Your mother is ruining everything," she snapped. "She's destroying my reputation." He didn't yell. He didn't fold either. "She's not destroying anything," he said quietly. "She's reclaiming her name. You're the one who tried to erase it." He left the room without waiting for her reply. The next morning, Rosen was served a formal vacate notice, hand-delivered with her full name printed in block letters across the top. The officer stood silently as she read it. It wasn't rage that crossed her face. It was disbelief. I let myself in just after dawn. The key slid into the lock without resistance, as if the house had been waiting for me. No luggage, no fanfare, just me and the morning light threading softly through the lace curtains they hadn't bothered to remove. The air smelled different, scented candles and something artificial. But the bones of the house were still mine. I moved from room to room in silence, pressing my hand gently against the banister, the door frames, the side table by the stairs. Every inch still remembered me, even if they had tried to erase my presence. In the kitchen, I placed a folded note on the counter. I didn't hide it. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. Do not return without permission. YH. The house didn't need to shout anymore. It had spoken. That afternoon, Malin came by. Alone. No dramatics. No raised voices. Just a son carrying too many years in his eyes. He didn't ask to come in. I opened the door and let him step into the hallway where he'd once learned to walk. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I should have said something. I should have stopped her. I didn't know how to hold both of you at once." I looked at him the way I used to when he scraped his knees, soft but unsparing. "I still love you," I said, "but I've already updated the will." He flinched. Not because of money, I know that, but because it meant the story was no longer his to rewrite. The house, the accounts, the trust I added, they'll be under Lita's stewardship from now on. It's not personal. It's structural. The house will eventually become what it was always meant to be, a place for women like me who ran out of rooms they were allowed to stay in. He nodded, once eyes on the floor. He didn't ask to stay. When he left, I stood in the doorway, and watched his car disappear past the oak trees Harlan and I planted, and then I shut the door. The heater in Rosine's apartment groaned again, struggling against the March chill. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, but it didn't help much. The radiator hadn't worked properly since she moved in, and the landlord stopped answering her texts 3 days ago. Her phone blinked beside her, casting a cold blue light across the room. 22 missed calls. Names she used to recognize. Clients she once dazzled. One bridesmaid she hadn't spoken to since the day she tossed her bouquet into a crowd she never really cared for. The screen stayed lit, mocking her. The retreat was gone. Listings pulled. Licenses under review. A notice had come from the state board citing misrepresentation of ownership. Her name had become a cautionary tale in every circle she used to dominate. Avira hadn't even said goodbye. There was no announcement, no suitcase. Just a sharp knock on the door and a plain black government vehicle waiting outside. When Rosine looked out the window, her mother was already in the back seat, eyes forward, hands folded. Now, in the quiet, Rosine could still hear herself that moment, so confident, so smug. Either serve my mother or leave. She had said it like it was a chess move. Final. Clever. Now she whispered the reply she never thought she'd say. I should have left. Back at the house, I trimmed the lilac stems carefully, guiding the new growth gently up the trellis Harlan once built with his bare hands. The soil smelled rich again. It hadn't, not for months. In the sunroom, the kettle hissed softly. Lita was pouring tea for 2 women from the shelter downtown. New guests, both widowed, both recently displaced. Their laughter echoed lightly through the open window. One of them asked if I ever regretted giving up so much for a home others tried to take. I shook my head. Not even for a second, I said. Because now my house is mine, and so is my peace.